When Layla and Mira Summers enrolled at an upscale, predominantly white private school, they expected obstacles, but nothing had prepared them for the hostility that greeted them as soon as they passed through the gleaming entrance. Trevor Michaels and his clique of tormentors had already resolved to break them down. The twins absorbed every put-down, every push, and every cruel epithet hurled at them, but when the taunting escalated to physical attacks, they found themselves with no alternative. What their aggressors overlooked was that Layla and Mira were expert martial artists, trained by their father, who had instilled in them the lesson never to yield to malice. The sunlight stretched over the grounds of Crestwood Heights Academy, bathing the tidy lawns and lofty brick structures in a warm yet unyielding glow, as if the buildings themselves silently guarded the students congregating in tight clusters. Every aspect of the academy exuded wealth and age-old customs, from the meticulously clipped hedges to the smooth stone walkways, as though the institution had been constructed not only for education, but to remind every passerby precisely where they fit in society. Layla and Mira Summers, walking side by side, immediately felt that burden even before reaching the main steps. Their uniforms were pristine, their postures impeccable, and their expressions composed, yet underneath they could sense the weight of every lingering look and every hushed remark exchanged by their peers. They were accustomed to stares and whispers, but this was more piercing, more frigid. It wasn't mere interest. They knew instinctively that it was judgment, preformed long before they had uttered a word. This wasn't solely because they were new or because they were twins. It was because they were black. And here that trait made them conspicuously different. Their father, Calvin Summers, had forewarned them that challenges like this could occur. He had never shielded them from the truth. Instead, he taught them to anticipate these moments and to carry themselves with resilience and dignity, regardless of adversity. He ensured they learned to defend themselves, not only with sharp words, but with the skills and composure unusual, and for their age. Yet despite all his teachings and extensive training, stepping into that institution felt like entering the eye of a storm. They could see the tempest approaching from afar, yet escape was not an option. "Check that out," a boy remarked loudly, his tone devoid of any subtlety as he leaned casually against a column at the school entrance with a self-satisfied smile, his friends snickering beside him. "Twins?" another boy jeered, as if the very notion of matching pairs was an insult. He mocked that they were identical, his tone laced with disdain. Layla's eyes flashed briefly towards them, noting how they puffed up as if they owned the space. A surge of anger ignited in her, but she quickly subdued it. Her father's steady voice resonated in her thoughts. They craved a reaction, so do not give in. Mira's grip tightened on her bagstrap, her knuckles paling against its dark fabric, yet like her sister, she maintained an unreadable facade. The unspoken bond between them was deeper than words, and each sensed the smoldering determination in the other. No conversation was necessary. They had endured much together, functioning as a single force both in thought and action. They moved forward with deliberate steps, eyes fixed on the doors ahead, undeterred by the oppressive heat radiating off the steps like concentrated beams of the sun. As they progressed into the central courtyard, the message became unmistakable. This space was not meant for them. The glossy floors, towering windows, dazzling display cases, and proudly hung banners all lent an air of theatricality, as though the school had been designed for a performance from which they were excluded. "Disregard them," Mira murmured. Softly, her low, steady tone more a reaffirmation than advice. She didn't glance at Layla, confident that her sister grasped the meaning without explicit instruction. "I see them," Layla replied quietly, the subtle firmness in her tone resonating beneath the surface. "But I won't let them see me crack." Soon, they reached the imposing main doors, tall, weighty, opening with a gentle mechanical hum. that belied the struggles waiting beyond. Inside, the blast of cool air met their skin, though it did nothing to quell the internal heat that raged within. The corridor already teemed with students who paused their conversations to watch the twins pass by. Some faces brimmed with curiosity, others with overt disdain, and a few harbored something even darker, amusement, as if they were eagerly anticipating a moment when the newcomers would falter, providing them with a spectacle for ridicule. Layla's gaze swept over the hall, mapping its unspoken divisions. She observed clusters of bullies loitering by the lockers, groups of girls, whispering behind their manicured nails, casting furtive, malicious glances. Every nuance was noted, every sidelong look was a challenge posed to them. They knew this was merely the opening act, the scrutiny, the murmurs, the sharp retorts delivered, just loudly enough to sting, yet softly enough to evade confrontation. All were mere preludes to an ever-mounting ordeal. Still, they were ready. They had endured far worse. They were honed for such tempests, even if the skies over Crestwood Heights looked deceptively serene. Layla and Mira could feel the building. Tension, a silent promise of an inevitable storm looming just beyond the horizon. They wouldn't be the instigators. As their father had instructed, they were to let provocation come to them. Yet when that storm descended, they would stand steadfast, prepared to meet it with force beyond expectations. The initial days at Crestwood Heights unfolded exactly as Layla and Mira had predicted, though such foreknowledge did little to ease the burden. From the instant they entered their first class, it was clear that every gaze was scrutinizing them, not with welcome or even benign curiosity, but with a chilly, ingrained judgment. The classroom itself was tidy and bathed in sunlight, the gleam of polished surfaces conspicuous, but no brilliance could disguise the way both students and teachers treated the twins as if they were outsiders. Teachers recited their names without ever looking up, voices flat and indifferent, as if their presence were nothing more than a checkmark on an attendance list. In the hallways, the crowd shifted just enough to block their path, forcing them to sidestep or slow down, an ostensible coincidence, though everyone understood it was deliberate. It wasn't accidental. The pattern was clear, and every student present was aware. Yet Layla and Mira refused to yield the reaction their tormentors desired. They held their heads high, walked with purpose, and refused to let the charged atmosphere corner them. Even as the stares lengthened and the whispers sharpened, each day they marched forward, silent yet resolute. It wasn't long before Trevor Michaels appeared. He was unmistakable, carrying himself as though the grounds belonged to him, striding with an air of nonchalance that was rooted in a self-assured disregard for any rules. His sun-bleached hair was styled with the precision of a magazine cover, and he wore his uniform as though it were a costume, often loosening his tie and leaving his shirt untucked to signal his carefree attitude. "Hey!" Trevor called out one morning, his voice strong enough so that his call reached the twins clearly as they made their way to their lockers. His cronies gathered around him, chuckling as if the joke needed no elaboration. "Did you lose your way to the servants' entrance?" he taunted, his tone crisp and accusatory. His cronies burst into loud laughter, not merely at the joke, but because they had a target. Mira kept her eyes forward, maintaining a placid demeanor, her steps measured as she refused to glance back. Layla's eyes briefly met Trevor's, steady and unyielding, but she continued on. She saw his smirk, observed his cohorts exchanging knowing looks, feeding off his theatrics. Although her chest tightened with indignation, she kept it hidden. They did indeed both keep their composure, but Trevor was not finished. "Seems you don't understand English," he bellowed louder, ensuring that everyone nearby could hear. "Perhaps we ought to try speaking your language instead." "Oh, what? Tribal chatter?" The subsequent laughter was harsher, rippling across the courtyard and drawing in more onlookers who until now had been indifferent. Now, every student was watching, some with mild amusement and others with eager anticipation, none daring to stop the spectacle. Layla's jaw clenched as she suppressed the surge of anger, her breath deliberate and even. She felt Mira's steady presence beside her, anchoring her against the brewing storm Trevor was attempting to create. They advanced steadily. In the ensuing days, the harassment worsened. Trevor's friends, Zane and Brennan, began escalating their assaults. They turned their antics into a game, deliberately colliding with the twins in the hallways, knocking books from their grasp with insincere apologies and smirks that conveyed their certainty of success. "Guess they're studying under the cleaning. Staff now," Zane muttered one afternoon while brushing past, his tone audible to nearby students. "Maybe they're just here for practice," Brennan added with a self-satisfied smile. "Someone's got to keep these floors spotless." The twins uttered no retort. Instead, they retrieved their scattered books, straightened their shoulders, and moved on. Yet with every shove, with each sneer, the burden grew, a weight that slowly pressed down, testing how long they could endure before it overwhelmed them. What compounded the strain was the eerie silence from everyone else. No teacher intervened, no student spoke up, and even those who did nothing actively joined in, merely averted their gaze. In classrooms, teachers remained absorbed in papers or screens, unwilling to acknowledge the ugly undercurrent festering beneath the school's immaculate facade. At home, their father, Calvin Summers, recognized the signs even as the twins tried to mask them. He had trained them to fight, to defend with skill and poise, and to detect trouble long before it erupted, reading the subtle signals of an impending storm. Over supper, he carefully observed his daughters, noting the tight set of their jaws and the heaviness in their eyes. He neither prodded for details nor pressed them to speak before they were ready. But when they finally recounted what had transpired, he listened without interruption. "Remember what I taught you," Calvin said later that night, his tone calm yet resolute. "Self-control is true strength. They want to get under your skin. Do not let them succeed." Layla nodded, her lips pressed into a determined line. Mira's eyes, though holding a spark of frustration, echoed her sister's resolve. "They're pushing," Layla stated, "steadily and with intent. Every day, they push harder," Calvin replied without a pause. "They assume you'll crumble. They expect you to. And if they don't cease," Mira interjected softly, her eyes bright with resolve. Calvin's gaze locked with theirs, offering no room for doubt. "Then they will soon learn that you do not break." His words settled among them like an unspoken vow, a promise they carried forward into the next day and each day thereafter, hidden beneath a veneer of calm resolve. Strolling through the corridors of Crestwood Heights, their heads held high, Layla and Mira were acutely aware that it wasn't a matter of if the hostility would intensify, but when, and that moment was rapidly approaching. The days blended together, each more frigid and relentless than the one before, as though the walls of the academy progressively constricted around them, a constant reminder that this place was never meant for them. Every hour was another trial, a measure of just how much they could endure. They had maintained their dignity through the stares, the murmurs, the cheap taunts, and the forced laughter of peers long since conditioned to reward cruelty rather than condemn it. Beneath this placid exterior, though, the mounting pressure was undeniable, like dark clouds coalescing before an inevitable deluge. Inevitably, Trevor decided that mere jeers and light shoves were inadequate. He had craved a grander stage, a chance to fully humiliate the twins in front of the entire school, in a way that would sear the insult into their memory beyond what any stoic reaction might mask. The plan required no complicated scheme. Cruelty is never intricate when confidence and a willing audience are involved. It began one morning when Layla and Mira discovered their lockers defaced with vile, hateful phrases, scrawled in thick, dripping scarlet paint over the metal surfaces. The disparaging words were bold and shameless, displayed for all to see. In addition, crude caricatures were doodled with black markers, mocking faces exaggerated to dehumanize them, and crumpled sheets stuffed into locker vents were inscribed with even more cutting insults, each worse than the previous, as if the bullies had competed to outdo one another in vileness. Standing there, shoulders squared and expressions steeled in control, the surrounding hallway erupted in cacophonous laughter, bitter and harsh, as students crowded to capture the moment. On their phones, determined to spread the humiliation, some laughed heartily, unrestrained in their cruelty, while others covered their mouths in feigned modesty. Yet it did not matter. Every sneer and every laugh struck the twins like a needle to tender skin. Trevor leaned casually against a locker, arms folded, witnessing the unfolding spectacle with a wide, self-satisfied grin, his eyes glittering with triumph. Zane and Brennan flanked him, their expressions reeking of smug satisfaction in every posture. "Thought we'd add a little decor for you," Trevor announced loudly, his voice oozing with feigned concern as though it might console them. The crowd's laughter rolled down the corridor like relentless waves crashing on a barren shore. For a moment, even passing teachers paused, their glances lingering momentarily before they turned away, pretending ignorance, absolving themselves of responsibility. Mira's fists curled at her sides, her nails biting into her palms as she strove to steady her ragged breathing and contain the rising anger. She sensed Layla's fury simmering just beneath the calm surface, both sisters meticulously holding back the erupting storm of emotion. They had withstood name-calling and shoves, but this public act was different, a carefully orchestrated assault intended to strip them of dignity in front of everyone. Despite every effort to remain composed, the oppressive weight of it all pressed down more acutely than ever before. Their father's lessons resounded in their minds, urging them to maintain composure and let discipline guide their actions. Yet, as the laughter persisted and Trevor advanced with slow, mocking applause, the delicate boundary between restraint and response became perilously thin, a line that signaled the end of passive endurance. "You should be thanking us," Trevor jeered, stepping closer now, his tone cutting low yet sharply, "because it takes effort to force you to feel like you belong." His words, carried on the murmuring winds, captivated every student within earshot. Layla's eyes locked with his, a silent challenge radiating from her unwavering gaze. Though she remained mute, her look conveyed the message unmistakably. Mira stood equally resolute, the same burning determination evident in her measured, deep breaths. They would not grant Trevor the satisfaction of the reaction he craved, not at this moment. However, both knew in their hearts that this encounter marked a turning point, a no-return juncture in the ongoing battle. This was not simply another insult to ignore. It was a blatant provocation, a gauntlet thrown down in front of the entire school. Later, while erasing the vicious markings from their lockers with coarse paper towels provided wordlessly by a reticent custodian, Layla broke the silence with a voice full of raw finality. "No more." Mira needed no further explanation. She felt the same inferno raging within, a final fracture in the fragile patience they had painstakingly maintained. With a single firm nod, Mira affirmed, "No more." The decision was forged not solely in anger, but from a deeper recognition that mere survival was insufficient, that remaining passive threatened to surrender vital pieces of one's soul permanently. They sensed the impending moment with absolute clarity. Next time Trevor and his gang dared step forward, they would not recede. They would stand and fight as ingrained in them since childhood. The atmosphere at Crestwood Heights had only thickened since that vicious act. If anything, the air had grown denser, as though a visible heaviness now settled over every inch of the courtyard. Students congregated in their customary spots, speaking softer and casting furtive glances toward the inevitable route the twins would take. Layla and Mira, ever side by side, felt every watchful eye and every whispered word as though it was smoke thick enough to choke. Yet they continued with unwavering pace, heads held high and gazes fixed ahead, acutely aware of the challenges that lay in wait. Trevor Michaels was already present, stationed against a sun-warmed stone wall, his expression a blend of boredom and cruelty, as if he was certain that the outcome had been predetermined long ago. Zane and Brennan hovered by his side, their demeanor relaxed though their eyes remained alert, waiting like predators for a misstep from their prey. "There they are," Trevor called out, his voice carrying with such force that every nearby student's attention was inexorably drawn. His call rang through the courtyard like a signal flare, gathering a larger, curious audience. "Thought you might have stayed home after taking the hint," he taunted. Layla's steady, unyielding stare fixed upon him as she continued her stride, unperturbed by his words. "If that was your plan," she replied evenly, loud enough for the gathering to hear, "then you're pathetic beyond measure." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a collective surge of disbelief at the sharp retort. Trevor's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, revealing a flash of irritation that he quickly masked with renewed bravado. "You've got too much nerve," he retorted sharply, stepping closer until there was almost no gap between them. "Talking as if you own this place." Mira squared her shoulders and with a voice weighted by every insult endured and every slight absorbed in silence, replied firmly, "We do belong here, more than you ever will. You swagger around as if this place were yours, yet deep inside, you know the truth. Without your little band, you're nothing more than cowards, hiding behind juvenile taunts and feeble allies." Her words stung deeper than anticipated, shattering the fragile mask of superiority Trevor had worn. The assembled crowd stirred more robustly, as if the very ground quivered in response to the collision. Trevor's eyes narrowed, his stance tightening as he closed the remaining distance, the uncertainty behind his glare momentarily exposed before swiftly replaced by fiery indignation. "Say that again," he challenged, his voice taut like a stretched wire. "You heard her clearly the first time," Layla replied calmly, her unwavering stare dismissing his provocation. "Perhaps you just can't handle the truth when it lands squarely before you." As Trevor's chest heaved in frustrated defiance, he turned to the onlookers, desperate for validation to restore his faltering pride. "Do you really think you're tough, standing there with your mouths running free without facing the consequences?" "We don't think," Mira responded, her tone slicing. "Through the clamor with precision, we know." That was the spark that sent Trevor's anger over the edge. Without hesitation, his hand lashed out, connecting hard with Layla's shoulder, forcing her to stagger back, though she quickly regained her footing, as if rooted firmly to the ground. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as the tension escalated from simmering hostility to an open threat. Seizing the moment, Brennan surged toward Mira, snatching her books with a derisive smirk and scattering the pages in a chaotic sprawl reminiscent of the disgrace inflicted days earlier. Zane followed by shoving Mira squarely, his mocking voice laced with venom. "What now? Gonna run to your daddy?" That was the unmistakable line, an act so bold it could not be ignored. Layla's intense gaze met Trevor's as her composed voice, now brimming with the slow, built-up force of repressed anger, declared unequivocally, "No!" Her words rang out clear and resolute. "We are done running!" In one fluid, decisive motion, she stepped forward, and with the practiced assurance that came from years of training, drove her palm into Trevor's chest, knocking him off balance as his surprise was evident in his widened eyes and the abrupt escape of breath. At her side, Mira responded with equal smoothness, lowering herself gracefully to sweep Brennan's legs out from under him, sending him crashing down with a force that instantaneously silenced his derisive laughter. The courtyard erupted into chaos, students shouting, retreating to form a wide circle around the unfolding confrontation, their faces caught between shock and elation as the twins seized command of the moment. Trevor scrambled to recover his composure, but his familiar cocky grin had vanished, replaced by sheer exasperation as he rushed toward Layla, his swings clumsy and driven more by panic than refined technique. However, Layla was already anticipating his every move. She dodged his wild attempt and landed a firm, controlled punch into his stomach, the impact punctuating each controlled strike with precision. Brennan, desperate to rise again, found Mira waiting, grasping his shoulder firmly and twisting him down once more, every move a testament to years of rigorous training embedded into her muscles. When Zane lunged at her in a blind, desperate charge, Mira sidestepped with an almost balletic grace, seizing his arm as he passed and flipping him down hard beside his friend, leaving both tangled and gasping. Clutching his side, Trevor staggered back toward Layla with a low snarl, only to be met by a clean strike under his chin that snapped his head back, causing him to stumble and lose balance as he attempted to steady himself. The twins showed no hesitation or second thought. They had long internalized their father's instruction, every block and counter perfectly honed in unison. They were not there to entertain the spectators. They were there because the line had been crossed, and they were ready to respond. The morning bustle of the courtyard, once filled with idle chatter and drifting footsteps, now thrummed with an energy so palpable it appeared as though every brick beneath their feet vibrated with its force. The circle of onlookers expanded further, their voices rising in a chorus of shock and exhilaration as Layla and Mira surged forward like an unleashed tempest, their synchronized movements a perfect symphony of precision driven not merely by anger but by disciplined training. Trevor was gradually forced back by the severe, punishing blows Layla delivered. His attempts to reassemble himself were futile as fear began to shimmer in his eyes, now unmistakably visible beneath the red flush of his skin and the beads of perspiration along his brow. He had long believed himself invincible, fortified by numbers and his reputation, but none of that shielded him now. Bereft of his customary smug advantage, he faced an opponent who refused to cower. "Did you really think we'd let you get away with it?" Layla said, her voice measured yet unwavering as she sidestepped another wild swing and responded with a calculated elbow into Trevor's ribs, a precise strike that elicited a grunt and left him staggering sideways. Brennan, having struggled to rise once more, charged at Mira with a frustrated snarl, but she anticipated him, slipping under his reach and driving her palm forcefully into his chest, a blow that sent him collapsing backward, his body crumpling. As he hit the ground, gasping for lost breath. "You chose the wrong opponent," Mira added in a tone as harsh as tempered steel, her eyes never leaving Brennan as she stepped deliberately closer, leaving no room for him to regain his footing. Desperate and enraged, Zane snatched a splintered piece of wood from a nearby bench, clenching it in both hands as he advanced recklessly toward Mira. But she perceived his charge in slow motion, her heightened senses, honed by discipline and adrenaline, intercepted his onslaught. She deftly sidestepped his thrust, her hand shooting out to seize his wrist in an unyielding grip, twisting with precision to disarm him and sending the makeshift weapon clattering harmlessly aside. In that same instant, she spun and delivered a crushing elbow strike to the side of his face, the force enough to send him crashing to his knees, dazed and thoroughly defeated. "Cheap tricks won't save you now," she warned, her voice soft yet resolute, echoing among the silent, rapt onlookers whose earlier amusement had given way to a mix of awe and trepidation. Enraged and humiliated, Trevor lunged at Layla once more, his fists flailing wildly, driven by panic rather than the disciplined art of combat. Yet Layla was already one step ahead. She maneuvered under his desperate attack, seized his wrist in a vice-like grip, and with an abrupt twist drove her knee into his stomach with uncompromising force. His breath escaped in a choked burst. As he collapsed onto the ground, clutching his midsection. "You had every opportunity to back off," Layla declared firmly, her tone addressing not only Trevor, but every witness, the weight of all that they had endured underpinning her words. "Yet you persisted." Releasing his wrist, she allowed him to fall completely, his body crumpling as he fought for each breath. Her face, resolute and unyielding, set the tone for the confrontation that followed. Mira stood resolutely at her sister's side, her chest rising and falling in measured, deliberate breaths. Together, as they had been since the moment they arrived at the academy, they felt as though the very ground beneath them was theirs by right, a right claimed with unwavering determination. The assembled crowd, once hungry for spectacle, now fell into a weighted silence, the gravity of the encounter sinking in, as no one could deny that this was no ordinary scuffle between schoolyard adversaries. This was deeper, final. A tempest that had long been brewing had finally been unleashed. Perhaps now, they silently hoped, someone might understand. Mira's voice eventually broke through the tense quiet. "Maybe now you'll learn." Later that day, while erasing the grotesque markings from their lockers with coarse paper towels discreetly handed over by a silent janitor, Layla's soft but resolute voice shattered the lingering silence. "No more." Her tone was as unyielding as stone. Mira needed no further prompt. The same blazing resolve that had simmered within her was now irreversibly ignited. With a decisive nod, she affirmed, "No more!" Their decision was not birthed solely in fury. It emerged from the deep understanding that mere survival was inadequate. At times, standing idle meant sacrificing irreplaceable fragments of oneself. They sensed the impending clash as palpably as the very air they breathed. Next time Trevor and his cohort stepped forward, they would not retreat. They would fight, embodying every lesson instilled in them from the very beginning. In the wake of the brawl, what followed was not chaotic bedlam, but rather a drawn-out, heavy silence that stretched out until every moment seemed burdened by the weight of what had transpired. Even as the aggressors lay groaning on the hard ground, clutching injured ribs and nursing wounded pride, the throng of students who had once cheered on their cruelty now stood in stunned stillness, their earlier excitement replaced by a somber, almost remorseful hush. No teacher had intervened during the altercation. Not one adult had stepped forward to halt the unfolding violence. Yet, as if beckoned by the oppressive atmosphere, they gradually began to appear, their faces etched with a perplexed concern. Though none could feign genuine surprise, all knew deep down that this outcome was inevitable, or at least that something had long been on the brink of shattering beneath the pristine facade of those hallowed halls. And now that it had, none could longer pretend it was unseen. Then came a harsh voice. Mr. Carter, the assistant principal, parting the gathered students with determined steps, his eyes sweeping over the scene with an expression caught somewhere, between indignation and reluctant relief that he had arrived just after the violence subsided. His gaze passed over the injured boys sprawled across the courtyard before resting on the twins, standing tall at the center, their breathing controlled, their posture impeccable, their eyes reflecting an unyielding serenity that insisted they were the true victors. "What is happening here?" Mr. Carter demanded, his words sounding more like a formality than a genuine inquiry, for the chaotic tableau needed no further explanation. Trevor coughed harshly before forcing words past. Clenched teeth. They attacked us. His tone was thick, with a mix of desperation, fear, and that all-too-familiar arrogance of someone convinced he could twist the narrative by speaking first. A murmur rustled among the onlookers. Some averted their eyes, unwilling to meet, the twins' steady gazes or those of the arriving adults, while others observed Trevor with uncertainty, caught between his version and the undeniable truth witnessed firsthand. Layla's jaw hardened, though she maintained her poise, her father's teachings echoing in her mind. Self-control is strength. Speak only when it truly matters. Meeting Mr. Carter's eyes squarely, she said in a measured tone, "They've targeted us since this morning. They overstepped, and we only defended ourselves." A flicker of discomfort passed over Mr. Carter's face, before it was quickly masked by the practiced professionalism demanded by Crestwood Heights. "We shall resolve this matter internally," he stated curtly, his words offering little solace or promise of fairness. "Everyone follow me." The twins did not resist. They exchanged a quiet look, a shared, unspoken understanding, and fell into line behind Mr. Carter as he led the small group away from the courtyard, leaving behind a scattered assembly of students whose earlier excitement had curdled into uneasy silence. Inside the administrative offices, the space felt more confined, the temperature brisk, yet nothing could diminish the fervor simmering behind the twins' composed demeanors. Seated side by side in stiff chairs outside the headmaster's office, their hands resting on their laps and their eyes fixed ahead, they listened as Trevor, Zane, and Brennan exaggerated their injuries to anyone willing to hear, casting themselves as victims in a story twisted far beyond recognition. It wasn't long before their father arrived. Calvin Summers entered the room with the calm assurance of a man prepared for the worst, his gaze moving first to his daughters, not merely to assess any physical harm, but to gauge the resilience of their spirit. Their eyes met, unbowed, and, in that silent exchange, a spark of pride flared. He then turned to the headmaster, a sharply dressed man named Harrington, whose expression was as tight as his suit, as though forced to depart from a matter of far graver importance. "A thorough investigation will be undertaken," Harrington said tersely, his hands folded neatly upon the polished desk. "In the meantime, I regret to inform you that your daughters will be suspended until the facts are fully reviewed." When Calvin finally spoke, his voice was calm, yet carried a weight of finality. "It is clear that my daughters were merely defending themselves. I expected nothing less from Crestwood Heights." Harrington's eyes narrowed momentarily at the quiet rebuke, but he offered only a curt, tight-lipped nod. Not long after, Trevor's parents arrived, and the atmosphere in the room immediately thickened. Sabrina Michaels strode in as though commanding the space, her sharp heels clicking, her eyes aflame with fury, concealed beneath a practiced facade of concern. Her husband, Gavin Michaels, followed with a rigid, imposing frame, his jaw set, and his glare fixed intently on Calvin and the twins. "This is unacceptable," Sabrina burst out before anyone could interject. "Our son has been assaulted. And you expect me to believe that these violent girls will merely be suspended? They deserve expulsion, perhaps even arrest." Her voice escalated with each word, and although Harrington attempted to placate her with vague assurances of further action, it was clear that Sabrina Michaels would remain unsatisfied until the twins were harshly punished. Calvin's gaze never wavered from her, his eyes steady and unreadable, though his daughters sensed the controlled tension simmering within him, fierce yet not unrestrained. He let her speak until her fury exhausted itself. "This isn't finished," Sabrina finally spat, her eyes narrowing to accusatory slits as she fixed a withering stare on Calvin, daring him to retort. "No," Calvin calmly replied, his voice low and even. "It is not." His words resonated silently around the room, an unspoken promise forged in certitude. As the twins rose, their suspension notices issued with stark efficiency. They held their heads high, their demeanors unbroken, their eyes clear. The street brawl had ended, but a new conflict was just beginning, a fight that would not be resolved with fists alone. As they stepped out of the office, their father flanking them, they understood implicitly that what was to come would be faced together. Under a quiet, late-afternoon sky, the house exuded calm, with the soft hum of distant traffic and the whisper of leaves in the breeze, an almost deceptive peace, as if the storm from Crestwood Heights had retreated only to hover menacingly at the horizon, ready to re-emerge. Inside, the atmosphere carried an uncommon weight, not of fear or remorse, but of a stark awareness that the events at school were far from over. They would follow them home. The Michaels would not let it lie. Calvin sat at the kitchen table, relaxed yet vigilant, eyes fixed on the open window that overlooked the tranquil street, as though he could already sense the impending turmoil. His daughters sat across from him, a trio united not in silence, but in shared readiness, their bond fortified by all they had endured and fiercely fought for that day. "You knew they'd come," Layla stated, her voice steady, imparting a truth that needed no question. Calvin offered a subtle nod, his eyes still on the street, his mind already formulating a plan. "Men like them," he replied quietly, "never accept a loss in silence. They convince themselves that victory is their due, and when thwarted, they bring their war right to your doorstep expecting you to falter." Mira's eyes flicked to the window as she laid her hands flat on the table, fingers poised yet relaxed, contemplating her father's words with the precision of every movement she had made earlier. "They assume we're finished simply because we chose to walk away," she murmured, her tone low and incisive, "but they've never witnessed true strength." Before Calvin could reply, the crunch of tires over gravel rang out sharply, a warning as clear as a bell. The sound of car, doors slamming, harsh and driven by anger, accompanied the heavy, measured steps of expensive shoes pounding toward the front door. "They're here," Layla remarked quietly, though her words were unnecessary. None could deny it now. Rising smoothly from his seat, Calvin's presence filled the room with a quiet, formidable certainty. "Stay behind me," he instructed. His daughters, not out of fear, but so they might observe how one defends their home when the battle breaches its sanctity. He wanted them to understand that true strength is not measured solely in fists, but in the unyielding stance one adopts when the world attempts to force them down. Before any doorbell could ring or knock be heard, Calvin opened the door himself, stepping onto the porch with the assured authority of a man who had faced far greater tempests. There, Sabrina Michaels's face contorted in fury, barely masked by the thin veneer of civility. Her eyes burned beneath impeccably styled hair and under the expensive sunglasses that rested like a crown of false superiority. Gavin Michaels stood beside her, rigid with barely contained anger, jaw clenched, fists flexing as his neck veins stood out starkly. "Do you really think you can get away with this?" Sabrina spat, not bothering with pleasantries as she advanced, her heels striking the concrete with measured finality. "You believe you can lay your hands on our son and escape unscathed?" Calvin's expression remained impassive, his gaze unwavering as he met her furious advance with the calm of an unmovable mountain. "Your son assaulted my daughters," he stated evenly, his voice low yet resonant with undeniable truth, "and they merely defended themselves. Whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, that is the reality." "Don't you dare play the victim," Gavin roared, his voice rough and trembling with rage, stepping aggressively forward as if eager to strike. "Your girls are beasts, just like you, and you have the gall to feign innocence." His words hung heavily in the air like a noxious cloud, casting a pall over the moment, yet Calvin refused to rise to the provocation. He allowed the insult to linger, revealing far more about Gavin than it did about him, then replied coolly, not with wrath, but with clarity, "You have already decided what we are, though that does nothing to alter the facts. You raised a bully, and today he learned exactly what transpires when bullies cross the line." Sabrina's face contorted in even deeper anger. Her lips parted to hurl another venomous remark, but before she could, Gavin stepped forward, his rage overriding all restraint. "You think you can speak to us here, in our own neighborhood?" He growled, his voice escalating as he swung a heavy, uncontrolled fist toward Calvin. His face flushed with raw fury, and his eyes blind with certainty that sheer force could settle any score. But Calvin reacted with practiced precision, his hand rising to intercept Gavin's wrist mid-swing, halting the blow entirely with the solid strength of his grasp. Gavin's eyes widened in stunned disbelief as Calvin twisted his wrist just enough to unbalance him, causing him to stagger sideways before releasing him without a trace of wasted energy. "You have made your choice," Calvin said evenly, his eyes steely. "Now you must bear its consequences." Yet Gavin, too enraged and blinded by his own pride, charged yet again, both hands raised in a clumsy bid to overpower Calvin, as if brute strength alone could overcome years of cultivated discipline. Sabrina, shrieking indistinctly, lunged forward, her hands clawing at Calvin's arm, her fury untamed and wild. With immaculate control, Calvin stepped back just enough to draw both attackers forward, and using their momentum, expertly turned it against them. Grasping Gavin's arm once more, he pulled him off balance and sent him sprawling onto the porch with a resounding thud that made the wooden boards tremble. Sabrina swung wildly in a futile attempt to strike him, but Calvin intercepted her wrist with equal smoothness, twisting her arm behind her back in a display of deliberate, refined control that left her immobilized. Her breath escaped in a terse, hissing sound. "You have entered my home," Calvin stated quietly, his words carrying not only power but finality. "And you believed you could instill fear here. But this is not a place for fear." With that, a profound truth settled over the moment, inevitable and unchangeable. For an instant, time stood still on the porch, that delicate pause poised on the brink of collapse at the slightest provocation. The Michaels found themselves ensnared between unbridled anger and latent terror. Calvin maintained his firm hold on Sabrina while Gavin struggled to rise from the porch, his pride more wounded than his body, his eyes still ablaze with a futile rage that increasingly betrayed its futility. His face burned a deep, furious red, veins pronounced at his temples, his jaw locked in an expression that betrayed both humiliation and desperation to transform it back into aggression, though all who watched could see his facade was crumbling under the relentless pressure of reality. "You must release me now," Sabrina hissed, twisting in Calvin's unwavering grip, her voice sharp with panic, disguised as anger, though it cracked with vulnerability. "Do you even realize who we are?" Calvin's gaze remained as cold and steady as ever, unyielding as he continued to firmly hold her wrist. Not hard enough to cause pain, but with unmistakable authority. "I know exactly who you are," he replied, his tone even and resolute, "and it does not impress me." Rising once again, Gavin charged in a final, hopeless effort, his motions clumsy with unchecked fury, revealing that he had never truly mastered the art of combat, only the crude instinct to dominate with brute force and hollow conceit. But Calvin had encountered men like him too many times, and he sidestepped Gavin's charge with effortless grace, pivoting fluidly and using Gavin's momentum to hurl him forcefully into the porch railing, the wood groaning in protest under the impact. "Do you think this ends here?" Gavin barked, staggering backward as he attempted to recover, spitting his words through gritted teeth as if they might hold meaning now that his fists had failed him. "You're done, finished, along with your girls, every one of you." Calvin's answer was measured, stripped of anger because it needed none, only the pristine, undeniable truth. "No," he stated simply, stepping forward with the quiet, unyielding power of a man with nothing to prove but everything to protect. "You are finished." Gavin flung another desperate punch, but Calvin intercepted it once more, twisting Gavin's arm in a firm grip before sending him down to the porch floor with a final resounding slam that left him sprawled, breathless beneath his fallen pride. Sabrina's cries of panic filled the air, no longer hidden, as she struggled and clawed in vain to free herself from Calvin's grip.